back, everyone. This is The Nerdy Truth, and I'm your host, Dr. JJ Walcott. Our goal is to harness citizen innovation to build our country for the future. Today, we'll be talking about a topic very near and dear to my heart, modeling and simulation. It was started back in the 40s in the UK and by our armed forces, by the Air Force in particular, and then brought to the United States, recognizing the benefits of being able to simulate what we expected in the future so that we were better prepared to handle it and to deal with the questions that might come before. Since that time, M&S, all affectionately known as Modeling, Simulation, and Training, MS&T, has expanded substantially. We can see it at Disney World and other theme parks. We can see it in our analytics, getting into understanding how to look at different data points and recognizing trends and curves. And we can also see it in our simulators and our practices and trainings that we do with the military worldwide. So today we bring on a retired colonel from the United States Marine Corps. Colonel Walt Yates will be joining us, and we'll be talking about what we've seen so far and where we see this going in the future. And with that, let's bring in our guest. Welcome. How are you?
Doing fine, thanks.
Wonderful. Well, I've just had a chance to introduce a bit of what we're going to talk about today, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. I know your background well enough that I was able to just go ahead and put that out there. And so our topic today is really focusing on MS&T, where we've been over the last probably decade and where we need to go in the future. One of the things that can be very frustrating in government is the rules of the billets and jobs that people have to have. And we were remarking a couple months ago about how the DoD level MS modeling and simulation job was focused only on engineering. In fact, it's required that you be a professional engineer to have that position, but it's really a strategic and vision-based position, right? So it weeds out a lot of folks. And so I've kind of been on a little bit of a crusade to say, well, how can we find the people who are leading this from a thought perspective, this industry, and start connecting the dots to figure out what would we see as the vision? So with that, I kind of want to pass it to you and gather your thinking.
Well, one of the things that frustrated me from the beginning of my experience when I left what I'll call my tribe in the Marine Corps, Field Artillery, and went to Naval Postgraduate School and was in the first class of modeling and simulation officers that the Marine Corps sent there, a class of 2 of us, myself and Ray Purcell. We emerged into an organization that had no idea how they wanted to use modeling and simulation professionals. So we had a master's degree, we had done some research, and then for several years afterwards, I would tell the students that Marine officers that went to NPS after us, when you go to your next job, no matter how long that billet description has been there, if you're the first one to come from Naval Postgraduate School, you might as well have graduated from Hogwarts. They just want you to show them the magic because you're one of those people that graduated from the modeling and simulation curriculum. So write your own job description. Don't let somebody hand it to you. You know what you have been trained to understand and how to attack problems using modeling and simulation. So that was the first thing I realized. The second was when the Marine Corps publishes policies on IT governance, they carve out different categories and they have modeling and simulation as its own category. And that's ridiculous to me because it's IT. Modeling and simulation is a technique, it's not a function. And how do you know the difference between a function and a technique? Well, if you can put thou shalt in front of it, thou shalt manage manpower and personnel, thou shalt conduct, develop plans, policies, and operations. Thou shalt model and simulate. Okay, why? What's the cause behind that? So instead of viewing modeling and simulation and the recruitment of professionals to do that as a function, it's a tool that can be applied to support many different missions and functions. They view it as something that we bring in the modeling and simulation, and then we're going to have them do their thing next to all of the other functions instead of within them. And some people would say, hey, it's great, you've got a separate functional area. And it's like, no, we don't belong in a separate functional area. We belong embedded in all of your areas. We're decision support tools for planning, for model-based systems engineering. We give you, I'd like to say that, modeling and simulation is applying numerical methods, quantitative methods, instead of opinion-based methods. If you want to have quantitative measures behind your conclusions and why did we make this policy decision, show me the data and how you tortured it with your models to get the answers that you believe support a policy decision. So
yeah, it's a little
yeah.
like innovation, right? I used to joke all the time that in government it was like a step. We got to step 4 and it was time for us to innovate. And
Yep.
it feels the same way sometimes with modeling and simulation. It's okay, now we're going to bring in models, or now we're going to simulate something, and you're kind of thinking it's not its own separate entity. It is, as you put it, a technique, and it's part of the
This
bag.
is kind of a dated reference, but it's kind of like that old serial Saturday Night Live sketch with Michael Myers, where he's Dieter and his Sprockets talk show, and he says, "This is the point where we dance," and then they get up and do this new way of dancing. Okay, fine. Now you've checked the box for that. Go on to the next procedural item. But
yeah, but
yeah,
I think not understanding what it can be used for is part of the problem, right? We're now seeing this replicate. I like your term, show me the data. We tend not to be the show me the money people, but show me the data people, right? But
yeah.
We're seeing it with AI, we're seeing it with machine learning, we're seeing with all of the knowledge management, everywhere we're seeing the same trend, which is when we don't understand the nuances of the techniques or the technology or what it can do for us, instead we think of it as a step or as a functional area, and that it's just going to be this box that we check. And we completely miss the boat when we do that.
Yeah, and if we would, it's interesting when you have time to think about it, how we name our organizations and describe them. I came from the last 15 years of my career were spent at Marine Corps Air Ground Task Force Training Command. I was at Marine Corps Systems Command, the program manager for training systems, and our requirement sponsor was Training and Education Command. But when you think about how would you name that organization if you described it by its outputs? Simon Sinek's start with why should be our guide for, what does your organization do? Training is an activity, it's not an output. So if you were accurately naming organizations, the Marine Corps wouldn't be Training and Education Command, it would be Skills Development and Maintenance Command, or proficiency. When we don't have the traceability, what I call the resource loaded strategy for skills acquisition and maintenance on the ground side of the Marine Corps. But you should be able to take $1 in the planning, programming, and budgeting system, trace that through the acquisition management system, all the way over to training events, and say, with this $1, I bought this much proficiency in these specific training and readiness events. Because we have training and readiness manuals, and those specify this is the task conditions and performance standards, and the support requirements. So we need these training systems to conduct this task. How much do they cost? How many do we need? Where do we need to deploy them? And the aviators realized this a generation ago. There's any cultural opposition to aviation training simulation, to learn in flight simulators, was wiped away in the 1980s when the cost of tactical aircraft went straight up. The flight hours were unaffordable. You can't teach somebody to fly a Joint Strike Fighter in the cockpit of a Joint Strike Fighter, even if it had the two-seat configuration. You learn in simulation and you demonstrate in the real world. The bumper sticker slogan I like to apply is the business case for training simulation is synthetic experience that yields real world skills. That I may never have done this before, but I'm going to show you that I have the proficiency. I will develop more proficiency and the more nuanced and finer skills by actually doing it in the full fidelity real world, but I can learn a whole lot in a good simulated environment. So
So
go ahead.
yeah, so let me challenge you on that. What if
Okay.
we were to take that same concept and apply it to K-12 and say that we're focused more on the outcomes? And here we're in this situation where in our county, half of parents have decided to keep their children home, but of course are horrified that their children are simply going to be watching videos of teachers
Yeah.
who are not at all used to, distributed learning experiences and whatnot. But we know from a modeling and simulation standpoint that there is so much that could be done that that obviously isn't being used, but exists. We have K-12 developers all over the place that have developed programs that could be utilized. So if we were to kind of take away the barriers and we were in charge for a day and we said, you know what, we're going to put the best ideas to the country for how we could take what we have demonstrated is useful, as you put it, in the Air Force, right? It's too expensive, or in this case, we often also look at it's unsafe to try some of the maneuvers for our Air Force that they, simulating crashes or.
Exactly. The great example is, why do we have far more flight simulators than driver training simulators when we have far more trucks than we do aircraft? It's because trucks don't fall out of the sky and your chances of surviving it are far higher. And they don't cost $78 million each. So that's why driver simulators are not given the priority. And yet, when you look at Class A mishaps and where we injure and Marine soldiers, sailors die, it's in vehicle rollovers. There's a GAO study right now on training deaths, with a large component of that being in tactical vehicle mishaps. So sorry to divert you on that. But.
No, I completely agree. And so that safety factor now is something we're staring down for kids, for workers in training, in commercial settings. So, given your background and knowledge in this area, what could you imagine, if we were to apply this outcome-based goal instead of focusing so much on the fear of, are all the kids going to learn their multiplication tables? Is every child going to be able to learn to read the classic books that they were going to discuss in class? There's so much that we can do from a simulation perspective, recognizing the safety possible concerns for certain populations. How do we apply it?
I think our criteria for advancing people to the next level of education is still mostly based on knowledge regurgitation, and not, at the end of first grade, what problems are you able to solve? If we made K through 12 education, the graduation and advancement requirements based on problem solving criteria, we would be able to identify our prodigies a lot more quickly. It would become obvious who is ready to advance beyond their one cohort into the curriculum for another. I think that the modeling and simulation is not merely presentation of information to help you memorize it more efficiently. I've done that. I am proud to say I got a Security Plus certification in a very short amount of time by basically memorizing the question pool. And you can do the same thing with your FCC amateur radio license. All the questions are out there. You can memorize them and get an amazing score. But in terms of actually practical calculations and calculating the impedance of a circuit or something like that, I couldn't do it. But if we came up with problem-solving criteria and saying these are a variety of problems that an advancing first grader should be able to solve, and so forth, and then put them in a laboratory, simulation is the key thing about simulation that's different from most industrial age classroom learning is the action reaction. Everything you do is represented that if there is sufficient fidelity, this is what I call the basic ingredients to a training system. You have the visual, audio, tactile, haptic, smell and taste maybe, but you have the sensory cues that orient you to your environment, and you have the inputs so that when I touch this or toggle it or do something, the simulated environment responds in a plausibly correct way. Maybe not the exact way, and maybe the visual cue fidelity isn't absolutely realistic, but if it's good enough, I can learn how to operate in that environment, which is one of the interesting things about game-based training simulations in the military. We've gone into what I would call the fourth generation of tactical decision simulations, and the commercial gamers would call them first-person shooters for the most part, instead of we've gone to 4 generations. The visual fidelity, the spatial audio, really impressive, and we've moved to VR. On the other hand, we haven't defined what it becomes an art appreciation exercise. Look how realistic the trees are in the wind and so forth, but you're not even measuring the skills and performance outputs, the quality of the decisions made in this scenario. So it's, I was recently reading the Marine Corps' new Infantry Training and Readiness Manual, which is 600 pages long and has hundreds of individual, small unit, medium-sized unit, large unit training and readiness events. And it specifies the deployable virtual training environment 73 times. This event shall be trained in here. And yet,
Urban, did it take for you to get through that? You actually read the manual.
Control F. Control F. So I can tell you that it was, it's, that's knowledge regurgitation right there. I hit Control F and it said there's 73 mentions, 73
Oh,
tasks.
my word.
Yeah. But what I found was having, and I may be the only person who knows this from firsthand experience, because I was, before I became an acquisition training and simulation guy, I was the officer in charge of the Battle Simulation Center at 29 Palms. The training software that we've had, which is good, comes with no scenario support. So
yes,
the analogy that I draw is, we have a time-honored tradition since the end of World War II in the Marine Corps called the obstacle course. And the obstacle course is not just a bunch of obstacles, they are a specific height and order and so forth. So if you go to Camp Pendleton, their obstacle course looks exactly like the one at Camp Lejeune, at Kaneohe Bay. Anywhere you go, the obstacle course is standard, and it's built based on obstacles that the Marines faced at the landing at Tarawa in World War II. That you should be able to climb over log obstacles this high, climb fences, climb ropes, etc. But when you go to do that training and readiness event of run the obstacle course for time, you have an obstacle course. Instead, what we do with game-based training simulations is we give you a toolbox and a pile of wood and tell you first build an obstacle course. Well, I'm not a carpenter. I don't do scenario development. I need to come here, load the order of battle, and have my unit sit down and do the exercise. So we provide, an easel and some paint and so forth, instead of giving them the finished product and say, use this to train. And so we have very low return on investment in that. It's very entertaining, but the utility of it depends on who your far outliers are in being able to develop training scenarios that are really effective. And they're pockets of excellence, but mostly we field millions of dollars worth of equipment and it's very poorly used.
So it has the bells and whistles, excitement, visual, and in controlled studies, we can show that we save money by using simulators, whether that be because we don't damage equipment, or because we can put people through more often. But what it sounds like we haven't done, whether we're talking K-12 or we're talking military, is we have not utilized to its possibility, even today's possibilities. We've not used it large scale, and we have not really brought it to the American people or to the defense for the American people. Even though it's ready, we're capable, we know how to use it, we have the right people, as long as we're using multiple disciplines, as you said. Just because you can show up and run the exercise doesn't mean you can also build it. And so it takes all of these different groups to come together. So as we close out, what would you say are the 2 greatest steps that we would need to take going forward to be able to actually implement the benefits of modeling, simulation, and training?
Okay. Well, the first thing I would say is traceability. Know what the outputs are that you want to achieve before you start spending money. Unfortunately, on the 30th of September, no matter what your job description is, everybody in the federal government is a budget executor. They're, and it's all about, I got a zero balance before the money expired. And then we say, if we didn't get what we were hoping for, we'll try harder next year. Define the outputs and get the outputs that you're after instead of just expending the budget. The second thing for simulations for human performance and training, I think we should acknowledge that all the best ideas and visions for simulation fidelity and capability are not going to come from the US government. They're going to come from industry. And we instead should focus on the content. I would like to have platform agnostic content. I would like to have a library for those training and readiness manuals that say for the staff sergeant or lieutenant at the platoon level, we need to train these events. What are the, what's the training environment? What are the scenarios? And have, what the headquarters should be concerned with is version controlled, up to date training scenarios that have a 1.1. Whatever number. And instead of doing it the way I assume it's done similarly in the other services, my familiarities in the Marine Corps, but they have a TNR conference every 2 years where they update these big manuals and they publish a flat file PDF, and people download that, or maybe, heaven forbid, they print it, and then they reference that as they do their training plan.
Right.
What we should have is apply the techniques of DevOps for software development to the versioning of our training events. If we are doing a tactics, techniques, and procedures for a specific training event in the operating forces, and somebody comes up with an innovation or an idea, or the enemy presents us with a problem that our current TTP does not adequately counter, somebody needs to put that in as a software change request in the parlance of software development and DevOps. But a TTP change request needs to be working its way up through the system, approved, till it gets up to the Marine Corps Skills and Acquisition Command, and their subject matter experts should vet and approve that, and then publish it as a beta, send it across the Marine Corps. Does everybody agree with this? We get a comment period, and then we adopt that as the next update to our TTP. So instead of having a 600-page document for the infantry TNR published every 2 years, actually 4 years between the last 2 times it's been updated, it's been in force for 4 years, you would have individual, you could log on in the morning to your cloud-hosted TNR space and look at what are the most recently updated TNR events. And the operations officer or the training chief could say, oh, we did that one last month, but there's been a significant update. We need to retrain that, especially given the upcoming deployment. Or, we're good. The other thing is our training simulations do not connect to, in the Marine Corps Training Information Management System. None of the simulators that I was the program management for have any direct data feed to there. So ideally, you would have a Marine who trains in a system and swipes his CAT card or puts in his EDIPI or uses biometric, and the date of the training, the performance outcome is sucked up into the cloud. And when he transfers to another unit and the commander or the training chief says, is your tactical driver's skills up to date? And he's like, well, you got a license a year ago, but you haven't actually driven anything. You have no road miles in 9 months. We need to get you back into the simulator, or we're going to be driving on icy roads and you've never done that. So you need to go through those scenarios. We have all the technology available to us. We don't have the framework for connecting it all together and making the data flow. It should, and that would allow commanders and leaders to focus on what are truly the performance requirements for our upcoming mission, rather than going through procedural checklists. Let computers do what they do, which is track data and collect and organize it for us. And we're not doing that in human performance and training systems.
And you make the vision sound so easy and clear, and I just couldn't agree more. And I think that's really what our focus is on these talks. Is I keep saying we have all the capabilities we need to solve all these
Yeah.
problems. What we're not doing is connecting them, and the barriers tend to be the way government operates, the way military rules
Yeah.
operate, but not because we're not capable or we don't have the technology or we don't know how to solve the problem. We do. We just
Yeah.
need to hear yes a whole lot more. Well, Colonel Yates, thank you so much for joining
Thank you.
us. I'm Dr. JJ Walcott, and this is The Nerdy Truth.